Hello and welcome to the Spiced In podcast. I'm your host Jacob, and today we are talking all about The Mandalorian Chapter 9, The Marshal. Obviously, this is the biggest Star Wars thing that happened in the past couple weeks, so I'm going to do a pretty solid breakdown of the episode, everything I thought about it, some Easter eggs, and we'll go from there. As far as news goes, there was actually a decent amount of news. We had some High Republic news, we had some news about the Tales from the Galaxy's Edge video game. We had big news about Thrawn. All of that is broken down in a video I posted on YouTube. It's about those announcements that came earlier this week. So you can feel free to check that out if you like. But to make it quick, there was some more concept art that came out from the High Republic. And then for Thrawn, we got the announcement of the newest book in the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy, Thrawn Ascendancy Greater Good, which will be out May 4th, 2021. So I'm super excited for that, obviously. We're gonna definitely be talking about that in a couple months. If you want my full breakdown, my reaction to that, go check out my YouTube channel, The Spiced In, and you can find all of the information about those newest announcements. Don't worry, I haven't forgot. I was supposed to talk about Queen's Peril. And I'm basically done with the book. I have maybe 15 pages left. I'm not going to do it this week. I obviously could have finished it this morning. I'm not going to talk about it this week just because of the start of season 2. I want to have all the time to devote to that and just keep this episode on The Mandalorian. And I'll probably try and squeeze in the book in next week's episode. My original intention was, this episode was 50 minutes long. I was like, oh, well, I imagine that's just an episode 1 thing, and they're all going to return to 25-minute episodes for the rest of the season. But from what I heard, that might not be the case, so we might have an extra long episode next week. So we'll see. There'll be time codes if you want to skip around and don't really want to listen to the book. I'll definitely talk about the episode of The Mandalorian first and the book later, because I'm imagining most people are going to want to listen to what I have to say about the episode rather than Queen's Peril, which, to be fair, I have enjoyed quite a bit. So I think that's all. We're going to talk about the episode, so I'm going to do a little bit differently than I did last season. Rather than a beat-by-beat plot breakdown, we're going to do kind of a more general plot. Well, okay, I'll do first non-spoiler impressions, a general overview of the plot, and then just kind of go over some key tidbits I found interesting, and do some predictions to cap it all off. So I think that sounds good, so we're going to start our Mandalorian discussion with our non-spoiler thoughts on the episode. I think I probably speak for many when I say this is probably one of the best episodes I've seen of Star Wars television in a long time. I think it does better than the entire first season. Obviously, the longer runtime definitely helped with that. It allowed for more to happen in the course of the episode. There were a few episodes last season it was partially by design, but I didn't really feel like it moved the story forward. A few of those, older episodes. But this accomplished quite a bit in its 50 minutes, and it's fantastic. I think both Din and the child were excellent. I really like the new characters that they had introduced in this episode. This is not really a spoiler, but we're back on Tatooine, and that's, as boring as that could be, I think they handled it incredibly well, and it feels different and new than every other. We've been to Tatooine so many times, but this time feels different. I would say the closest we've gotten to this kind of feeling is the Gunslinger episode from last season, which is not a surprise if you've watched the episode. For all intents and purposes, we're in a space western, and it really comes out in this episode. So yeah, I think that's about all I can say. If you haven't watched the episode, go do that. If you're listening to this right now, I'm probably not the first person to have spoiled anything for you. It was pretty, honestly, I watched it I think 3 o'clock or something like that, or 4 o'clock on Friday. And I had already, I had avoided Twitter, I avoided Discord, I avoided Reddit, I avoided, that's about it. And I got it spoiled in a YouTube thumbnail, which was pretty crappy. Trying to pass my day of work with some YouTube videos to wait for, to be able to watch it with my girlfriend afterwards. And, got spoiled a thumbnail, so that was great. But, I'm glad to, I don't think it diminished my enjoyment of the episode, so I'm just happy it happened. So, this is your last warning. We are going to spoiler territory and going to do a quick general synopsis of the plot before we hit the finer details. So in this episode, Mando is looking for, he's following his quest to reunite the child with its people. He goes to a fighting ring to meet a crime, some sort of criminal, probably crime lord, Gor Koresh, to ask for trails to finding more Mandalorians so they can help him in his task. Their fight breaks out. He ends up winning the fight. No shocker there. And Gor Koresh points him in the direction of Tatooine. So we fly there, meet our old buddy Amy Sedaris, and then head off for Mos Pelgo in hunt of a Mandalorian. Get there, find out that Cobb Vanth, our boy, is there, rocking Boba Fett's armor. Mando's mad, but they decide to settle their differences by going after a crate dragon that's been terrorizing the town in exchange for the armor. On the way there, they have to team up with some Tusken Raiders and the village, which, naturally they hate each other, so they have to overcome their differences to kill the crate dragon. Mando makes some sacrifices, but everyone comes out okay except for a few Tuskens that got eaten, and quite a few Banthas. So they part ways, hoping they see each other again. Mando takes the armor and the child and a giant piece of crate steak and head off into the distance onto the next stop of their journey. And as we're pulling away, watching the beautiful binary sunset, a mysterious figure appears that is probably Boba Fett. So, boom boom, plot's out of the way. Let's break down what I thought was more significant in the episode. I watched it twice, took some notes, and there's just like a lot of cool details in here. I'm still not sure what planet we are on in the beginning. During my trailer reaction, I thought it could potentially be Obadiah, which is the homeworld of the Pike Syndicate. I thought it had a similar vibe to the parts of Obadiah where like Ahsoka and the Martez sisters had escaped from the palace of the Pike Syndicate. It's definitely some like seedy criminal world, probably in the Outer Rim. It could be potentially like Nar Shaddaa. That'd be interesting. It could be I saw a lot of people thinking Lothal. Maybe. I honestly still have no idea. And I'm not sure if we're ever going to get that information. It might come in like the season 2 visual dictionary or something like that. But yeah, or if there's ever like a novelization or like a comic book adaptation, we might find out. But as far as I know, there's no real clear giveaway to what that planet might be. So that was that. I did see some cool things in there though. They're panning around the fight ring. And it looks like there's a dude that he pops up in 2 shots. He looks a lot like Constable Zuvio, which was like a canned character from The Force Awakens. So I don't think it's him, but it has the same exact it's like kind of like greenish red helmet. And it's definitely the same species, but I have no idea if it's the same exact character. We had a conversation with Gor Koresh. I'm actually going to save one of the tidbits. One of the most interesting I found. We're going to hit that in our speculation section, but he talks about trying to find other Mandalorians. When Din interrogates him outside under the lamppost, he gives him the information, and he says he swears by the Gotra, which it could be like some sort of like I swear to God or something like that. He swears by some deity, but the droid Gotra is basically a droid crime syndicate. That was mentioned in the Dr. Aphra and Darth Vader comic books. When we return to Mos Eisley, he's talking with Amy Sedaris, R5 shows us the way to Mos Pelgo. So R5, it's the same R5 from A New Hope that blows his motivator, and R2 takes his place. But this is not the first time R5 has showed up in The Mandalorian. He actually shows up in the Gunslinger episode last season in the Mos Eisley Cantina. It's kind of hard to notice. I didn't notice it when I watched the episode, but I actually found it out watching the Mandalorian Gallery behind the scenes series. There was just like some section with Dave Filoni with some set designers, and they had a R5 looking unit. He's like, hey, can you just paint that orange and like paint some like burnt grease down the back of it where the motivator would have been? And yeah, so now it's R5, and R5 is still around Mos Eisley, and he's apparently in that docking bay now helping out the mechanic. So the next thing is Cobb Vanth, and there's so much I could say for Cobb Vanth. If you want to know more about, if you're not a huge like EU person and you want to know more about Cobb Vanth, I actually did an episode about it earlier this summer, I believe. If you're listening to the podcast on YouTube, I'll put a link to it in the description or put a card up on screen right now. But he was a character that was in the Aftermath trilogy of books. The Aftermath trilogy takes place between the Battle of Endor and the Battle of Jakku, and follows like a small cast of characters as they do missions for the like burgeoning New Republic to kind of try and defeat the last remnants of the Empire. So these books have all completed by the time this episode picks up. And Cobb Vanth, there's like a handful of like interlude chapters which go away and like kind of highlight something else somewhere else in the galaxy. And Cobb Vanth was in a series of these interlude chapters. And his story is more or less the same. There have been people that have done write-ups of all the differences. I'm sure, some of them might be soft retcons. Some of them you could write away. It's just, he's not giving all the information because we're not seeing, I mean, we are seeing what happened to him when he has his flashback, but it's also, we're seeing it through his narration. So it could be a little different. I know a lot of people don't like the unreliable narrator excuse, but it's possible. But yeah, I think what they did so well with him is they allowed casual fans to know exactly what he was about. They weren't confused at all. And, if you didn't read the Aftermath trilogy, you don't know you're not aware that you're missing out on a greater story or a greater context for him. Like my girlfriend watched it with me and she's become a lot larger of a Star Wars fan, but she's never read a book. She's never read any of the comics. She's just watched the movies and some of the TV shows. And she wasn't lost for a second. Like, she understood everything that was happening. I think they did such a good job of, here's this character. The hardcore nerds are going to know who he is and know his backstory. But we're going to explain it in a way that everyone can understand without alienating the more casual audience and without boring or upsetting the more hardcore audience. And of course, there are people that are like, his story's not one for one what we read in the book. This is awful. How could you do this? But the fact that they put such an obscure character in without argument, the most popular Star Wars franchise right now I think it's incredible. I never would have seen this coming when the rumors came out earlier. I'm like, yeah, it'd be awesome if Cobb Vanth was in the show, but there's no way they're going to do that. Like, they couldn't even be bothered to keep a single detail from Resistance Reborn and put it in The Rise of Skywalker, except for the fact that Wedge exists. Like, everything else in that book didn't matter. They even get a Corellian blockade runner. And I'm like, oh, that's the one on John Kloss in Rise of Skywalker. But no, it's the Tantive 4. Like, the smallest of details that they could have carried over from this book didn't matter. But the fact that they did this, I think, was incredible. And yeah, I'm very shocked that this made it in there. I think Cobb Vanth's a great character. I know a lot of people were big fans of this particular depiction of Cobb Vanth, especially with Timothy Olyphant. I think he did a great job. So, of course, we have to talk about, he has Anakin's pod racer as a speeder bike. After the Boonta Eve Classic, they sold off the speeder bike for more credits. And apparently, over the years, over like 30 years, it was sold for parts and became a speeder bike, which looks awesome. Like, I really want to see some fan art of someone just taking all the different pod racer engines from the Phantom Menace and making them as speeder bikes. I think that'd be awesome. Cobb Vanth, he picks up a Camtono, so the ice cream maker makes another appearance. It was the same one that held the Beskar ingots in season 1, and of course the same safe that Wilro Hood has in Empire Strikes Back, which we will of course be getting a story on in the new From a Certain Point of View that comes out in I think 2 weeks now. So we'll have that on the channel when I get around to reading it. There was the Massifs, which were the Tusken dogs. Those appeared in Attack of the Clones. One really cool detail I saw, I really thought it was visually very beautiful, especially when they rode in to pick up the explosives, was the Tusken kind of caravans. And they kept the detail from A New Hope. Obi-Wan says they ride in single file to hide their numbers. And that's something that they did every time you saw the Tuskens riding, they rode in single file. And when they were coming in to pick up those bombs, just like the camera work and the cool back and forth head waving of the Banthas, I thought that was very beautiful. So the Krayt Dragon that they fight, they go to his lair and they mention that it's an abandoned Sarlacc pit. I am not convinced that this is the same one. The Great Pit of Carcoon, which was in Return of the Jedi. I'm not convinced it's the same one. It could be. There's no evidence really either way. In Aftermath, it does talk about how I'm pretty sure like this side of the, well, first off, the Sarlacc gets injured by Jabba's sail barge exploding and crashing into it. But I also believe that like the side of it erodes away, which leads it to die. So it could be that this giant hole, like this kind of giant valley that they're in the whole time, was where that eroded away. I don't think it's the same one. There are probably multiple Sarlaccs on Tatooine, especially with how Cobb Vanth says, like, I've been on Tatooine my whole life. There's no such thing as an empty Sarlacc pit. You would imagine there are multiple. So I don't think that's the same one. Obviously, the Sarlacc that ate Boba Fett, his armor got out of there somehow. It is likely that also Boba Fett, well, not likely. It is very probable that Boba Fett came out with it or without it at some point as well. But anyways, they're like talking strategy and they set up a little diorama, and I thought it was really interesting. They're like arguing about the scale of everything. Is the Krayt Dragon too big and too small? And I'm not 100% sure about this, but I kind of interpreted it as a nod to the Krayt skeleton in A New Hope. When C-3PO and R2-D2 first land on Tatooine, C-3PO walks by some giant like snake skeleton, which is later identified as a Krayt Dragon in the EU. But this skeleton is tiny compared to the Krayt Dragon we see. The Krayt Dragon we see is one of the largest creatures, I think, in Star Wars. I mean, the only things that would go up against it was like that giant creature in Solo in space, the Dianaga with the space slug from Empire Strikes Back, and maybe one of the biggest of the big fish in the Phantom Menace. Those are the only things I could see coming close to that size. The greater Krayt Dragon is enormous. So this tiny skeleton in New Hope doesn't really make much sense anymore. I believe it's described as a juvenile, so it died young before it got that huge. But I personally saw this argument of scale as a nod to, how they kind of had to switch up the size of the Krayt Dragon to make it more formidable. The fight was pretty awesome. Not gonna lie. I'm curious as if they're talking about how the weak spot was on the belly. It kind of reminded me of the fight with Smaug in The Hobbit, how it has a weak spot on its belly. Probably not the same. The weak spot on the belly is not a new concept for monsters. Obviously, one of the more easy to catch kind of Easter egg nods, cool tidbits was Boba Fett's jetpack blasting off when Mando hits it in the back, similar to Return of the Jedi. But a cooler part at the very end was the Tuskens find a Krayt Pearl inside the Krayt Dragon. So that the Krayt Pearl is an old kind of EU object. It's been around for a long time. This is the first time we've seen it in the new canon. But in the old canon, so the way it works in the geology, if you will, or biology of the object is pretty much the same across both canons. The Krayt Dragon will eat rocks at time, and sometimes, maybe it eats a rock that has a kyber crystal in it, which was what powers a lightsaber. But over time, if it eats a rock with a kyber crystal, over time it'll, condense and be in its body for long enough to turn into a pearl. And that's the thing that the giant thing the Tuskens hoist in the air at the end. In the old EU, and in the new EU, apparently it's been mentioned in some reference guides, with enough work and refinement, it can be used to power a lightsaber. So that's awesome. I don't know if that will come back in any way. I think it's just a one-off to be like, hey nerds, here's a Krayt Pearl. Alright, that's it. I don't think I'm not sure we're gonna see that again. I do think we're gonna see Cobb Vanth again. I think it makes a lot of sense. This is our transition into speculation. I think we're gonna see Cobb Vanth again. It felt very similar to the first season, where you're meeting all these there's people across the galaxy, whether it's Cara Dune or Greef Karga or Queel, and at the end of the season there's a big threat that you have to bring the gang back together. I think that's what's gonna happen with Cobb Vanth. I think he comes back at some point, and I think he'll be part of maybe an episode 6 or an episode 7 or 8 big event. What I thought would be really cool, which I don't think is going to happen, but like it's a bit of a stretch, is that something happens with Boba Fett, obviously, but maybe Mando still has the armor, or maybe Mando comes in contact with more Mandalorians, and they determine Cobb Vanth has kind of proven himself via combat to be admitted into the ranks of the Mandalorians, and he goes off with them and earns his own armor. I think that would be very cool. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but it's not the most unlikely thing to happen this season. Mando earns his clan of the Mudhorn. Maybe Cobb Vanth earns the clan. First off, I feel like Mando feels like he got robbed because he's like, I got this lame Mudhorn on my shoulder now, and now you're telling me I could have potentially gotten a Krayt Dragon. But maybe Cobb Vanth joins the clan of the Mudhorn, or maybe he becomes a Krayt Dragon clansman. I think that would be cool. Another big speculation thing, I'd mentioned it earlier when we were in the Gamorrean fight ring. So here's the direct quote from Gor Koresh when he pulls the guns on Mando. He says, "Normally I have to seek out remnants of you Mandalorians in your hidden hives to harvest your precious shiny shells." And that's in reference to the Beskar armor. He really likes the armor. But this gave me a bit, it seems so small, but this gives me a big insight into what Mandalore is like right now. So obviously there's the Great Purge that happened sometime later in the Imperial era. We don't know a lot about it. It was just mentioned by Moff Gideon, but we know that bad things happened to Mandalore after we saw them last in Rebels. And we didn't really know why Mando's covert in Season 1 was so strange. Why are they all hidden in sewers? Why don't they take their masks off? Why is only like one of them going up to the surface at one time? Why did they ditch their armor? Why was that such a big deal to try and survive? Well, this game, just this one line makes me think of so much more, gives me such more clarity, I think, on at least what I perceive to be the case right now in the galaxy. So my assumption is Mandalorians were vastly decimated during the Great Purge. In order to survive, they split into small factions, small coverts, like we saw in Season 1, and scattered themselves across the galaxy, and basically hid away from the galaxy. The threat of the Empire, maybe the Empire's mostly gone now, but not entirely. They're just trying to survive now and strengthen their numbers. That would explain why they took in people like Din in to try and if not to grow their numbers through traditional means, but they can do it through adoption as well. And this also would explain why Din doesn't know where the rest of the Mandalorians are. Maybe it was information that wasn't privy to him. I'm sure the armor potentially knew where some other Mandalorians were. But if you told all the Mandalorians where all the other groups were, then it'd be easy for one of them to be interrogated, give up that information, and then suddenly a bad actor could go in and swoop up and kill a lot of Mandalorians and steal a lot of their armor. Not that the armor is the sole motivator for killing Mandalorians, but if someone is so inclined, they could do so. So that explains why he doesn't have that information, why he needs to seek others out to try and find his people. So that leads us to, where do we go from here? So obviously he has to find some group of Mandalorians. There's still room that Sabine could be involved, Bo-Katan could be involved. But one of the big things we have to consider in this is the role of the Darksaber. So the Darksaber, it was the lightsaber of the first Mandalorian ever inducted into the Jedi Order, stolen from the temple by the Mandalorians later in the history of the Republic, and became a symbol of Mandalore, and would often be something that would unite the people underneath one leader. We see that in Rebels when Bo-Katan takes up the Darksaber from Sabine and tries to lead her people back, but obviously we know something goes wrong there with the Great Purge. So we have Moff Gideon as the big bad who at some point got a hold of the Darksaber. My theory for the future of this season, this honestly something that might not be wrapped up until next season, is the role of the Darksaber. My assumption is either Mando, potentially Sabine. I really think she is more. It's more in her character to care about Mandalore, since she had the Darksaber for a while and voluntarily gave it up. I was talking with someone on Twitter recently how I think it'd be so perfect for her to take this Darksaber back now, when she's ready to reunite the people, because she gave it. She was selfless to give it up, and now it's her time to claim that role. But anyways, I think one of them has to take the Darksaber and defeat Moff Gideon, obviously, first, take the Darksaber and you reunite all these hidden like Mandalorian cells across the galaxy and restore Mandalore. I think that is the ultimate kind of the ultimate ending for either the arc of Din. I don't think that that's the arc for Din. Probably the arc for Sabine or some other important character. But I think that's where this is all heading eventually. Of course, I need to do a little bit of mention to Boba Fett at this point. Some people think it could be a red herring and it's a clone. I think that's very unlikely. So we saw Tamura Morrison, who was the actor for Jango Fett in Attack of the Clones, and he was, his face was scarred. He had no eyebrows. He was bald. He had a Tusken Gaffi stick and a long gun, and was in black robes up on a hill. So the main two potentials are a clone. Some people say Rex, or or Boba Fett. I think Boba Fett is the most likely option by far, just given the location, the timing, the story. Rex doesn't have any reason to be on Tatooine right now. We last saw him on Endor. He was a older, fatter, bearded man without heavy scars on his face. Meanwhile, Boba Fett, the last time we saw him, he was on Tatooine. He was in a Sarlacc, which would probably mess him up pretty bad. Could have scarred his face. Could have, the acid or something in there could have removed his eyebrows and his ability to grow hair because of the scar tissue. It makes a lot of sense for him to be on Tatooine, and we know he is not inside his armor, so he is without armor. I can't see it being anyone else. In the old canon, what happened was that he set his jetpack to explode and launched himself out of the Sarlacc and was partially rescued by Dengar, I believe. I think probably what happened here is if there was a hole exposed on the side of the Sarlacc, maybe he works himself out. So for some reason has to be separated from his armor. Maybe it's because of his injuries, and goes from there. And the Jawas get the armor, and he struggles through the desert before killing some Tuskens, and is trying to just find his way. This really is, you have to think that this is not that long after the events of Return of the Jedi. It's only a couple of years. The time there has been much time. People have been, there have been a lot of speculation. Why would he still be on Tatooine? Maybe he's just searching for his armor. Maybe that's his mission. It has to be Boba Fett. I would be shocked if it wasn't. So I just had to throw that out there. What he's gonna do next, I don't know. Could he might be hunting Din to get the armor back. Maybe he poses himself as a new threat to the child for some reason. I think there's going to be a lot of philosophical difference because Boba Fett hasn't really, he hasn't had any exposure to this new idea of Mandalore after the Great Purge, but he really didn't have much, as far as we're aware, he didn't have much expansion to the old idea of Mandalore either. He's raised on Camino. He spent much of his time after that with bounty hunters that were not Mandalorian, and there's no evidence that he ever really went back to that point. Well, not even went back. He wasn't there to begin with. There's never much evidence in the current canon that he went to Mandalore. In the old canon, he was seen as much of an outsider for a while before he became the leader of that planet. So this is not a new idea, and I think it's probably similar here, where there's gonna be almost as much as of a cultural rift between Mando and Cobb Vanth as there is between Mando and Boba. So a lot to discuss there. I think that's where I'm gonna probably wrap it up for this episode, though, as far as The Mandalorian is concerned. However, before we completely end this episode, I have to do one more quick mention. So there's been a pretty large fundraiser that's been going on in the Star Wars community recently. It is the Trans Rights or Human Rights fundraiser, which has been organized by Maggie Lovett of the Star Wars Friends podcast and Your Money Geek, Candace Kaw of the Geeky Waffle, and Eric Eilerson of Utini and the Living Force podcast. This has kind of been in response to some less than stellar events or opinions that have been thrown around in the community. We're not going to really talk about that, but it's no secret that trans people go through a pretty rough time in their life. So we're trying to make things better to kind of, I guess, even out for the things that have happened in our community recently. So if you are so inclined to donate, or if you can donate, sharing the campaign does quite a bit itself, so you can do that as well. We can go over and search the Trans Rights Are Human Rights. This is the way. It's a GoFundMe campaign that has currently raised over $10,000 to benefit the Transgender Law Center. And it's now, I think the original goal was like $3,000, maybe. That probably wasn't even the original. I watched it start back in September, and it just like kept crushing goal after goal. Its current goal is $15,000, and this will, help a lot of people that need that assistance. And the current end date for the fundraiser is December 20th of this year. So if you were so inclined, you can go over there, show your support, or at least share the link. I will put that in the YouTube description of the podcast, and I'll also probably tweet it out. So if you can't find it, just search my Twitter in the past couple days of this episode being posted, and it'll be very readily available to you. It's gotten quite a bit of traction from the fans as well, but it also was featured in Variety magazine. The physical Variety magazine had a short snippet about this fundraiser this past month, which is wild. So it would mean a lot for me and for a lot of other people if you could go show your support there in whatever way possible. So that's all for this episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you liked what you had to hear, I will be back every week for Mandalorian discussion. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at SpicedInPod. I've been streaming some Star Wars Squadrons lately on Twitch, so just look up Twitch The Spiced In. It's not that hard to find. The social tags are at SpicedInPod. Everything else is pretty much The Spiced In. TheSpicedIn.com is, of course, your source for Star Wars articles and book reviews. So thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for, as always, to Graham Bull for providing the music for this episode, and may the Force be with you.